Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the New York Yankees. We are about midway through June of 2024, and we should be thrilled with the way this season is going. The Yankees, as you can see, are 42 and 20, 3.5 games up in the American League East on the always pesky Rays. We just came back and won in extra innings against the Chicago Cubs to take 2 out of 3 from them on the road. They're the only team in baseball that has a better record than us right now. So we should be really thrilled with the way this season is going, and in a lot of ways we are. But we've had a really bad 3 or 4 days here. Over the last 3 or 4 days, Giancarlo Stanton out for the season with a ruptured MCL, and then just yesterday, Clark Schmidt out for the season with a ruptured UCL. So we've lost probably our second best offensive player behind Aaron Judge and Stanton, and we've lost an important member of our starting rotation in Schmidt. Losing Schmidt necessitated bringing Davy Garcia up from Scranton Wilkes-Barre. He's spent time, as you can see, in both the majors and Scranton this year. Certainly he is now plugged in as our number 5 starter for the foreseeable future. We've taken an initial look at the trade market, and there's really garbage out there at this point. It is only June 14th, so there's another month and a half plus until we get to the trade deadline. So certainly expect to be seeing some more interesting players offered as other teams fall out of contention over the next 4 or 5 weeks. And certainly we can make an offer for a pitcher who's not on the trade block as well, which we'll certainly consider if we have additional injuries and or Garcia is just particularly ineffective. But on the field, it's been a really good season for the Yankees, but we've dealt with a lot of injuries throughout the season, and certainly the 2 most significant are the ones that have occurred over the past 4 days. And we've made it to July 1st now. Fortunately, no additional injuries, so a pretty healthy couple of weeks for the Yankees. And we're still winning 2/3 of our games. The lead on the Rays is up to 7. You can see the Twins have been playing some incredible baseball recently, though, and they are actually now ahead of us in the standings, at least in terms of winning percentage, but they've also played 4 more games than we have. But 9-1 in their last 10. They've won 6 in a row. So at this point, the Cubs and the Twins both actually do have a better record than the Yankees, but still a very strong season for the Bronx Bombers thus far. We do have money to take on some contracts as we're now in July and getting closer to the trade deadline. We've also got the amateur draft coming up, and there has been a kind of steady trend higher in terms of attendance now that the kids are out of school and the weather is good. Hopefully we can continue selling out or coming close to selling out a lot more games over the next couple of months during the summer months here in New York. Taking a look at our team stats now that we're more than halfway through the season. Another really good month in June, right on target where we've been all season, winning 2/3 of our games. We actually have slipped down to second in the American League in runs scored, still number 1 in runs allowed. So a very strong performance by the Yankees on both sides of the field thus far. Our batting average, which is one of the goals of ownership for us to improve, has improved pretty measurably this year, up to 4th in the American League as we've gotten rid of a few of the older players on our team. And then, honestly, having Giancarlo Stanton on the bench doesn't help us to, in terms of our overall performance, probably losing the power that Giancarlo brings, but probably helps improve our batting average at this point to have him on the IL. You can see we're up to 4th this year. As I talked about, we were 14th a year ago, and that is the only goal that we have to complete during this season to keep Mr. Steinbrenner happy. Unfortunately, though, July has started off with a pretty significant injury. Carlos Rodon going to be out for 6 weeks, having a really nice year. 10-6 record with 145 strikeouts in 109 and a third innings, 3.38 ERA. Probably would have been named to the All-Star team in a couple of days if not for the injury, but now with the way the game works, I don't think with him being on the IL that will happen. So we will put Rodon on the 15-day IL. Hopefully we'll have him back in the majors by late August and he won't suffer any setbacks with the injury. Going to need to go back down to AAA to see if there's any pitchers we can bring up there. Also, we'll take a quick look at the trade block before we do that. I'm guessing there's still not going to be anything too exciting out there. Taking a look at starting pitchers specifically, and yeah, definitely not any difference makers yet. I mean, we may be getting to the point where a Lucas Giolito or Domingo Germán or Nathan Eovaldi, a couple of guys the Yankees could bring back into their organization, may be the right way to go. I guess James Caprillion is also a guy that the Yankees could bring back into the organization if I really wanted to get a little more desperate, but not ready to pull the trigger on anything yet. But we are certainly getting to the point where we've got some tough decisions to make as far as what this team's going to look like. I think it's probably time to see what Randy Vasquez can do since we need a starter at the major league level. And when we look at all of our pitchers, other than the 4 current starters, none of them have really sufficient stamina to start. We certainly could put Brian Abreu into that role, but he's really more of a reliever historically over the course of his career. And although Vasquez has not necessarily been all that impressive at AAA, a 5.36 ERA last year, he's gotten worse this year with a 5.56 ERA. He's almost 26 years old. If we're ever going to see what he can do at the major league level, having 2 of our key pitchers on the IL is probably the time when we're going to be able to see what he can do. We've got a big lead in the division. Don't think that there's any question that this team is going to end up in the playoffs this year. So if we get a few poor performances out of him over the next couple of weeks, it will just let us know a little bit about him as a prospect, and it'll also kind of give us a glaring, blinking sign in front of us flashing that we probably do need to hit the trade market for at least one more starting pitcher. And at 52-26, we've gotten to our midseason review of the goals with Hal Steinbrenner. Happy with our record, happy that we've improved the team batting average, disappointed in our attendance, making some progress on profit, making some progress on building the farm system. So seems like we're going all right. He's very happy with our progress towards the goals, although his overall impression doesn't rank as highly. Guess he's got some high standards. I think we're doing a pretty decent job so far. You can see we've got a lot of coaches across our system whose contracts are going to be expiring at the end of this season. We'll spend some time thinking about that, whether we want to bring any of these people back. Some of them are, quite honestly, people that we probably would have fired if we were doing this as a sim for the Yankees for a period of a decade plus. But given that we're just going to be playing through a few seasons here, we weren't as concerned with cleaning up the coaching staff immediately, but certainly with about a dozen coaches that are going to be potential free agents after this season, that'll give us a very easy opportunity to hopefully make some positive changes in the composition of our pitching staff across our minor league system. And we've made it to the first-year player draft. When I looked at this in our last episode, I was not particularly impressed with the depth of the draft. I don't know if it's just bad luck or if maybe that's a setting that will need to be tweaked going forward in Out of the Park 24, or perhaps it's just something that the developers will tweak a bit when they come out with the next patch. But didn't seem like it was a particularly deep draft for me. Obviously, the Yankees, after going to the ALCS. And if you haven't watched our previous episodes, that's probably not obvious to you, but they were in the ALCS last year, so we will be picking towards the end of the draft because of that. Have a pretty good record here in mid-July, up 9.5 on the Rays now, who continue to struggle. The Twins, we're actually in a flat-footed tie with them because although they've got 2 more wins than us, they've also got 2 more losses than us. The Cubs coming back down to earth a little bit, playing 500 ball over their last 10, but they are still a game and a half ahead of us for the best record in baseball. But certainly given the minor nagging injuries that the Yankees were dealing with the first month and a half of the season, and then the more significant injuries that we've dealt with more recently, and in the case of Schmidt and Stanton, we'll be dealing with for the remainder of this season. Team's performing pretty well, given what we've had to deal with thus far. As I mentioned, the Yankees will be picking near the end of the draft, 27th pick in the first round. Why does that number 27 ring a bell with the Yankees? Oh, yes, 27 World Championships. Going for number 28, hopefully this year. But the Yankees will be picking 27th. Taking a look at the draft pool, and you can kind of see it right here. 1 3-star prospect among all of the pitchers, and we've got very high scouting accuracy, and we also inherited with the Yankees Damon Oppenheimer, who is a highly favored tools scout who's excellent at scouting amateurs. So feel like we're going to get a pretty good read on the talent around, and there's just a lot of garbage as far as the pitchers, quite honestly. And when you look at the batters, kind of 5 really interesting prospects that Oppenheimer sees as having 3.5-star potential or above, but just not a ton of really dynamic prospects. Now, admittedly, when we look at the OOTP Scouting Association, the draft looks a little deeper in terms of the batters and slightly deeper in terms of the pitchers, but the overall talent level is not all that impressive as far as I'm concerned. And here at the 27th pick, not surprisingly, the only 3-star potential pitcher is gone. We'll spend a little time digging through. There's not a ton of obvious candidates, at least according to Damon Oppenheimer. 2 top prospects available are shortstop Bryce Ranier. Looks like he could be a decent major league bat, decent major league glove. Probably better suited to be a second baseman or even a third baseman than a shortstop, but could certainly play shortstop for you if necessary. Don't love the low work ethic in terms of his development, although that could be offset somewhat by his high intelligence. Also, he's over 19 years old, so certainly on the older side for a high school player. Obviously not expecting to see a Derek Jeter here with the 27th pick in the draft, but not the most overwhelming prospect in the world. Cade Arambide, catching prospect. It's kind of interesting. Also close to 19 years old, so definitely on the older side for a catching prospect, but looks like he could have a respectable major league bat, respectable glove, high leadership and work ethic. Seems like a guy who's probably got a pretty high floor, even if his ceiling is not incredible. I'm going to spend a little more time looking through some of the other players before making a decision. Maybe start looking a little bit at those potential ratings to see if there's anyone who really stands out. Arambide stands out a little bit in terms of contact, gap power. There are some players with better home run power than him that are out there, but he's actually a pretty well-balanced prospect in the context of what's available in this draft in terms of his ratings. So going to obviously have some decisions to make and going to spend a little more time looking through all of the players who are available, but Aaron Beatty doesn't look horrible to me right now. And we've spent some time looking through a lot of other players. Came back and our scout says Cade Aaron Beatty is the way to go. That was kind of the way that I was leaning anyways. Also a guy who's looking for a bonus well under his slot. Not that we can't afford him, but think that he could be an interesting addition. I don't think he's a superstar catcher. If his catcher ability was in his arm were just a little bit better, honestly, his arm is fine. If his catcher ability was another 5 or 10 points higher with that bat, well, he probably wouldn't be around for here at the 27th pick in the draft if that was the case. But that would be a profile that we'd really be interested in. But certainly seems like somebody who could be a excellent backup catcher, and honestly, he would be a more than acceptable starting catcher with that bat. I typically like to have a better glove, but would be willing to live with him if he completely develops. So we are going to go ahead and meet his bonus demand and move on to the second round in the draft. And it might be a pretty easy decision for us here in the second round because Bryce Rainier is still around. Didn't love him as a prospect, but certainly, at least according to our scout, he is by far the most talented player who's still available. Scout is actually recommending that we go with third baseman Carson Messina. I like the home run bat, but don't love the personality. Don't love the glove. Rainier is a solid prospect. As we talked about, I generally try to avoid players with low work ethic, particularly in the early rounds of the draft. But for a guy that, to me, looks like the most talented player who's still out there, to pick him up late in the second round, and his bonus demand is $470,000, so certainly reasonable signing for us to hopefully bring on. I think we're going to go with the shortstop here in the second round, Bryce Rainier. And there's just really not a lot here in the third round. You can see, according to our scout, there's only 3 players left among pitchers who are more than 2-star potential. And honestly, it's not much better than that when we look at the batters, where there's only 4 players with that profile. Scout is still telling us to go with Carson Messina. I actually don't love him as an option. Catcher Chris Newstrom, weaker version of the catcher that we picked in the first round. No need to go in the third round for him. J.D. Rogers, a center fielder, just doesn't look like he's ever going to have a major league bat. And then Michael Sirota, 21-year-old, very versatile player defensively, decent-ish bat. You know, it looks like he could be maybe a average major league hitter. But none of these guys really excite me that much, so I'm going to go with one of the pitchers, and the one that I prefer, although they're all very similar, is Jake McCowan. Not a great prospect, does potentially have a 4-pitch arsenal, and quite honestly, that's why I'm going to go with him. Looks like his stuff, movement, and control are all going to struggle to be major league average. Don't think he's a big-time prospect, and again, for the third round of the draft, for him to be a choice for us does make me think that the quality of this draft is not up to snuff. Obviously, it could just be a one-time situation, but if it is more of a bug in the game, hopefully it's something that the developers will figure out over the next week or two and get that tweaked going forward, so we get nice, rich draft classes of players with lots of potential for our future. And it ended up being a pretty cost-effective draft for the Yankees, driven by Cade Aaron Beatty, looking for well below slot, as well as our second rounder, Bryce Rainier. A few players after that looking for slot in terms of our 2 third-round choices, McCowan, and then we had a supplemental pick, which we used on another starting pitcher, Talon Bell. Jax Phillips, probably the only guy we're not going to sign. He's looking for over $8 million. We picked him in the 12th round. Just not that great a prospect. We offered him $100,000 just to make him angry, and I'm sure he will refuse that offer and go off to college, where hopefully he can improve his ability somewhat and get a little more realistic in what he's looking for in terms of his demands as well. And as we reach the All-Star break, the Yankees continue to play some great baseball. 60-28 record as we get ready for the break. 10.5 games up on Tampa Bay. We're up 2 now on the Twins for the best record in the AL. And we're actually up half a game on the Cubs, even though they've got 61 wins. They've got 2 more losses than us. So Yankees have the best record in baseball right now, winners of 5 in a row and 8 of our last 10 as we head into the 2024 All-Star break. And I would expect that with the best record in baseball and one of the top offenses, one of the top pitching staffs, and one of the top defensive records in the American League, that there's going to be a lot of All-Stars for the Yankees. You can see Aaron Judge was the top vote getter, so we know that he will be a starter. Looks like he is the only guaranteed starter for the Yankees as designated hitter. I did mention in the last episode that with the injury to Stanton and the fact that Judge is also fragile defensively, we've been using him, particularly once Stanton went on the IL several weeks ago, primarily in a DH role. Take a look at his fielding stats, and you can see he's played 1 game in left, 2 in center, and 26 in right this year. But using him much more frequently as a designated hitter to try to ensure that, at the very least, he remains healthy for us. Take a look at the All-Star rosters to see who we ultimately have on the team. Not surprising, even though he wasn't the leading vote getter, that Garrett Cole, with a 13-1 record, 2.62 ERA, named to the All-Star team. Evan Phillips, who's been in a middle relief role for us this year, picked him up in a trade with the Dodgers. 1-1 record with 1 save, but 41 strikeouts and 33 1/3 innings and a 2.97 ERA. He is also named an All-Star, and our closer Michael King, 2-1 with 23 saves, 1.41 ERA, 54 strikeouts and just 32 innings pitched. Thank you, 3/4 Badger, again for talking us off the ledge between a couple of episodes ago when we were thinking about perhaps putting Phillips or somebody else into the closer role rather than Michael King, but he has certainly excelled in that role. As far as the position players, though, little sparse for the Yankees. Oswald Peraza on the team, young shortstop, hitting over 300 with 20 homers and 43 ribbies, so not a shock to see him on the team. Aaron Judge, obviously, 319 average, 28 homers, 75 ribbies, the top vote getter. And then the rookie, I guess it did end up with 3 All-Stars. They just all kind of ended up down the list. So 3 pitching All-Stars, 3 position player All-Stars. The rookie, Austin Wells, who did spend some time earlier this year on the IL, but has really picked it up since he got back from that injury, hitting .310 with 12 homers and 239 at-bats. So nice to see, particularly in the case of the 24-year-old Peraza and the 25-year-old Wells, a couple of young Yankees being named to the All-Star team as the youth movement that we have embraced a bit over the first season and a half of this playthrough, getting rid of some higher played, older veterans and trying to open up some playing time for some younger players. Seems to be paying off a bit so far, not just because we have a few young All-Stars, but more importantly because the team overall is doing very well on the field this year. And in addition to being the number 1 All-Star vote getter in the American League, Aaron Judge was just named AL Player of the Week. 385 average, 4 homers, 9 ribbies for the year, hitting .320, 32 homers, and 83 runs driven in. Obviously, we are 91 games into the season at this point, so little less likely that he's going to be chasing 62 this year, but certainly seems like he's on pace to get well into the 50s. And certainly with the numbers that he's putting up right now with a 3.9 WAR, would think he'll be in the MVP conversation again. He's won 2 in a row. Quite honestly, the fact that we've moved him more into a DH role where he's not going to be able to produce some better than average defense in right field probably will work against him. But the goal is not to win a 3rd consecutive MVP award with Aaron Judge. The goal is to have him healthy for the playoffs and hopefully have him be able to help propel the Yankees to World Championship number 28. And as we do get closer to the trade deadline, I want to check in. David Garcia has kind of been doing fine for us at the back end of the rotation. Randy Vasquez is 2-0 for us, but that 6.60 ERA is not impressive. And quite honestly, Nestor Cortez kind of not having the year that we would have hoped to see out of him either. Certainly his stuff and his movement seem to have regressed a little bit from where they were. A year ago at this time, his stuff was 5 points higher. We thought his movement was 5 points higher. Still his similar control, but not quite the pitcher that we had thought he was. So I still kind of like our top 3 with Cole, Severino, and hopefully at some point Rodon, although it looks like he's still out for 3 to 4 weeks. But we're getting to the point where we're going to need to make a decision as far as whether we're going to bring on anyone through a trade. We've got a week and a half at this point until the trade deadline. Do have money to take on some salary, so it's going to be starting to be time for us to really work the trade wire and really get on the phones, talk to some other general managers and figure out if there's a big arm that we can bring onto the Yankees to help keep this excellent season being excellent. So although there's really no great options on the trade block, we've been perusing, basically just looking for pitchers with decent stamina who are at least above average in everything. And there's a pretty good list of players who meet that criteria that are out there. We went for a couple of the real young studs, Andrew Painter of the Phillies, and then over with the Miami Marlins, Yuri Perez. We couldn't get any traction with those guys with the fact that those are great young pitching prospects, and we're also not on a pretty difficult setting, but the most difficult trade setting, so that didn't work in our favor either. We do have an offer to the Diamondbacks on Dre Jameson. I think he's got enough stamina to certainly start, and although he doesn't have any dominant pitches, he does have a 5-pitch arsenal, and his fastball, his slider, and his sinker are all slightly above average. Got a decent curve. His changeup isn't all that much, but the thought is that if we can get him for a decent price, might be worth bringing on board. Almost 27 years old, so he's certainly not a top prospect at this point, but does certainly look like he could be a more than respectable 4th or 5th starter, which is really all that I think we need right now to get us through the rest of the season. And we're actually further away from being able to make that trade than I would have hoped. We offered Brando Maeda, who's a pretty decent outfield prospect, one of the better prospects in our system. Good defender, has some speed, looks like he could have maybe a little bit above average bat, hitting 282 down in rookie ball this year. So he's got a long way to go at 18 years old to be in the majors, but thought that could at least get the conversation started. And it did get the conversation started, but Volpe, Austin Wells, and Jose Trevino are the only players that get it done. So we've got some work to do to get a deal to the point where they would go for it. I think right now the first thing I'm going to do is add in Randy Vasquez, who's a pretty solid prospect, but we talked about he hasn't really done the job in AAA and hasn't really done the job in the majors either. We'd be sending him back to AAA if we made this trade. He's a little bit younger than Jameson. He's not as good, We'll see whether they view it as insulting or not. We'll actually even say that we'll retain all of Vasquez's contract, which might help. Cashman thinks it could be fair as it stands. The one thing that I will say about some of the changes that they've made, typically I've never even had an assistant GM on my team after the GM I replaced contract runs out. I just never have typically replaced them when playing OOTP. But now that I'm playing on this hard mode, I don't mind getting the feedback, even if the feedback historically has not always been all that useful. Still feel like having an assistant GM, particularly if you're playing on hard mode where you can't just optimize every trade, assuming that the color they give you is going to be accurate more often than not. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to consider playing with a assistant GM in this version. So we'll go ahead and submit that offer, and maybe we'll be able to get something done to bring another pitcher onto this team. All right, and adding Vasquez into the deal and keeping all of his salary has at least got us moving forward. Some familiar names, obviously, with Volpe still being in the deal. But there may be someone here, at a high-level view, a lot of these names are pretty familiar. I think they're some of the better prospects in our system. Don't think we're going to give up our closer. Don't think we're going to give up a proven starter, even though he's out for a while. But maybe we'll be able to piece something together here. And I think we've got a deal that we're going to do. We'll include 24-year-old minor league right fielder Christopher Familia. Can see it looks like he's going to be a below-average hitter, decent defensive outfielder, although his range isn't great. But he's already 24 years old. He's been fine in high A ball this year, 264 with 16 homers. But he's also a 24-year-old playing against a lot of 21 and 22-year-olds. Don't see him as being a big-time prospect. Brando Maella is certainly a better prospect. The floor for him with the ability to play any position in the outfield defensively, pretty good speed, and a bat that looks like it can be around league average, maybe a little bit better. Worst case for him is he's a fourth or fifth outfielder in the major league for a decade, and he could certainly become a starting outfielder. So I don't feel great about giving him up, but he's not a superstar in my view. And then Randy Vasquez, who we're giving up, is only a year younger than Dre Jameson, and he's just not as good. I mean, Vasquez has got his fourth pitch and honestly even his third pitch are probably better than the third, fourth, and fifth pitches of Dre Jameson. But Jameson's been a reasonably proficient major league pitcher over parts of 3 seasons now, whereas Vasquez, despite the fact that I do like that fastball and that curveball, has basically been a disaster for the last season and a half at this point, split between AAA and the majors. So for a team that's looking to win now, we're upgrading that fourth or fifth spot in our rotation by bringing on Jameson for Vasquez. We're only getting a year older, and we give up a decent outfield prospect in Maella and a okay prospect in Christopher Familia. So we're going to go ahead and complete that deal, which I think at the very least upgrades our pitching staff for this year, which was the whole point of doing it. Jameson is going to go right into the rotation for us. Actually, he's going to be slotted in as our third starter ahead of Cortez, who's been struggling. So that does make me feel better that although we are going to obviously be without Clark Schmidt for the rest of the season, and it doesn't look like we're going to have Rodon back until mid to late August after he does a rehab assignment. But even if we end up with somebody like Rodon on the IL for the playoffs, Cole Severino is a pretty nice 1-2 punch. And then Jameson and Cortez certainly is a third and fourth starter, or at least respectable. Obviously, the preference is to have Cole, Severino, and Rodon back, and then have to make a decision about whether we'd want Dre Jameson or Nestor Cortez to be our fourth starter. But feel like this is a move in the right direction for the Yankees here as we approach the trade deadline. Up 9.5 on the Rays in the division, and we still have the best record in baseball, so don't feel like we need to make a ton of moves, but did want to bolster the pitching staff a little bit. And the nice thing about bringing on a younger player like Jameson is that we're going to have control of him for a few years at this point, still not even eligible for salary arbitration. He's only been up for 1 year and 131 days, so he'll start making some money in a couple years, but this year and next season going to likely have him at the major league minimum as a pretty respectable fourth or fifth starter. So I think although his stuff is never going to jump off the charts, given that his fastball, sinker, and slider are all only really above average for a major league starter, still think with that good movement on his pitches and plus control, ground ball tendencies, and a guy who throws reasonably hard, he can be a pretty effective fourth or fifth starter for us for the next several years and give us a little youth in the rotation behind the likes of Cole and Cortez and Rodon and Severino. And taking a look at the broader statistics here as we get closer to the trade deadline, we're first in the AL in runs scored. We're first in the AL in runs allowed. Fourth in defensive efficiency. Our zone rating is definitely dipped a bit. But our 64-29 record is right where we should be. Incredible 37-11 at home, an excellent 27-18 on the road. There's no obvious holes that we need to fill in this lineup. I feel better about the pitching staff with Jameson on board, so I like that move. Not a great player, but as I said, a nice fourth or fifth starter for us for the next few years. And thinking about the lineup, I think the big question is how long do we keep Miguel Amaya? He has gotten the batting average moving up over the last month or so. Dominic Smith, since we brought him on board, you can see he hasn't played much at all. 5 at-bats, just 1 hit and 1 run driven in after we picked him up off the waiver wire. But felt like he was a guy, or was it a waiver wire or a trade? No, it was a trade with Cleveland. Sorry about that. I don't like lying to you. That was right when Giancarlo Stanton got... No, it was before Giancarlo got Stanton. No, it was when Stanton got hurt, because he got hurt in the middle of June. And at the time, we had on the major league roster, I believe it was either the young first baseman Andres Chaparro, or it was I think that's who it was. And Chaparro is not a huge prospect, but we'd rather have him at least get at bats down in AAA. So we moved him down there, opened up a roster spot, and clearly, Dominic Smith is not getting a lot of playing time, but do feel that he is like another professional bat that gives us a little bit of insurance if we have an injury to Rizzo or we have an injury to one of our outfielders and we need someone to pitch in as a DH and maybe move Judge back out to the outfield. So I don't think there's anything else obvious that we need to do. Take one final look at who's available on the trade block. Paul Goldschmidt would be a nice bat to bring on board. I mean, we don't really need him since we have Rizzo, but Goldschmidt's definitely a better hitter at this point. We'd have to take on a big chunk of his contract, but it looks like the Cardinals aren't expecting to bring him back next year. Whew, that would be an interesting bat to add to the lineup, that's for sure. Rent him. Tim Anderson at short, not a huge position of need for us, but certainly a great contact hitter with a lot of speed, hitting over 300 this year for the White Sox. So there's some interesting options out there. Again, not really any obvious needs for us, but if we can bring on somebody who can help us for a decent price, certainly we'll do it. Looking at the pitchers, not a ton out there. All of the top end guys are relievers, and we've just made that trade that we spent a lot of time talking about. So if we can get a big bat without having to mortgage our future further, I would think about it, but I don't really know whether there's going to be anything for us to do this last week or so until the trade deadline. And we thought we might be able to upgrade a backup catcher, getting Omar Narvaez from the Pirates. He was on the trade block, hitting only 243 games for them this year, and he's in the final year of his contract. So I thought if we at least started discussions around the Rule 5 catcher on our team, Miguel Amaya, who is definitely worse defensively and not as good catcher ability, although he does have a better arm. Thought that they might go for that, but they want another big-time player in return, a Jason Dominguez, Jose Trevino, Anthony Volpe, Simao Cantinho, who we just picked up in the international amateur free agency last winter, Luis Serna, or our closer. So I don't know that we're going to be doing anything over these last few days before the trade deadline. We'll see if some offers come into us. We also made a proposal to try to pick up Tim Anderson. That really went nowhere. We checked in on Goldschmidt, and he used his 10-5 rights to squash those discussions quickly. So I don't think there's really going to be too much that we're going to do, but maybe someone will send an interesting offer our way for us to think about. And we've received a handful of uninteresting trade offers over the last couple of days. So at this point, we're a couple days away from the trade deadline. I'll see if there's anything else interesting that comes in, or more fairly and more accurately, I'll see if there's anything interesting that comes in to the inbox as far as trade offers, because right now the offers that we've received haven't been all that interesting, and leaning towards us just playing this thing out at this point with the guys who have gotten us to this 67-31 record here towards the end of July. And we did get here on trade deadline day an offer that at least made us think. The Brewers offered us Brandon Woodruff, who obviously would be a really nice pitcher to add. 31-year-old, making $20 million this year, going to be more like $25 million a year for the 2 years after that. So I think he would clearly be a nice addition to the team. The problem is they want Sevy in return, who is a pretty similar pitcher, about a year younger. And we've got him locked up now for about $7 million less for the next few seasons than Woodruff would be making. I do think that Woodruff is probably a small upgrade over Severino, but I think I feel better having Severino around $18 million a year for the next few seasons than I would feel having Woodruff at $25 million for the next couple of years, being player who's also a year older. So although Cashman says he fully supports this deal, and it is an interesting one, I don't know if I'm being too loyal to Severino or not. Woodruff's definitely got better stuff, 65 stuff, 60 movement, 60 control. So his stuff is 10 points better. His movement's 5 points lower. His control is 5 points higher. They both have pretty nice four-pitch arsenals. They both throw in the mid to high 90s. Sevy, for some reason, in this game is normal injury proneness, which I'm happy about. So is Woodruff. They're basically the same guy. I mean, over the course of his career, Woodruff, 122 ERA plus, 82 FIP minus. while Severino, 118 ERA plus, 84 FIP minus. I mean, they look like the exact same guy in terms of their ratings, and they've really been the exact same guy, a well above average pitcher when healthy based on how they performed. So given that Sevy is a year younger and that he's cheaper for the next few seasons, I'm going to decline this offer, although I'm not going to lie. It was an interesting one that at least intrigued me. Now, if Woodruff, I'm guessing Woodruff isn't going to be on the trade block. Yeah, I think they probably just viewed that as an opportunistic chance to maybe make their team a little better and a little cheaper in Milwaukee. But it was tempting, but not tempting enough for me to say yes. So we've simmed ahead to the month of August, and we are past the trade deadline. Some nice news. A couple of big awards. Judge with the AL Player of the Month, 368, 15 homers, and 33 ribbies. So his season is really heated up with the warm weather. And Garrett Cole continues a magical season, 4-0, 39 strikeouts and a 167 ERA, 14-1 with a 238 ERA for the season. So as we've talked about, Judge likely to be in the MVP consideration again this year after winning back-to-back MVPs in 22 and 23. And Cole certainly should be in the mix for the Cy Young Award this year. So as the season turns to August and we get ready for the home stretch of the season, Yankees are 10 games up on the Rays in the AL East. We're up a game on the Twins for the best record in the American League. And it's not even the Cubs with the best record in the NL anymore. The Braves have passed them for that mark, but we're up 4 games on the Braves. So looks like as we begin August, the battle with the Twins is where we'll be fighting for the best record in baseball. Both of these teams have pretty significant leads on the AL West leading Astros and the Mariners, who aren't too far behind for the top 2 records in the American League. So certainly would think the worst case scenario for the Yankees is that we've got a first round bye, but would hope that we can hold off the Twins for the best record in baseball and have home field advantage for as long as we're around in the playoffs. Don't think too much is going to have changed in the team statistics. Still first in the league in runs scored, first in the league in runs allowed. So been a really nice year for the Yankees so far. And we'll find out if we can keep that momentum going in our next episode when we make the push for the playoffs with the 2024 New York Yankees. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.